Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Back to the Classroom event. My name is Kerry Bowie. I am an MBA from the class of '06, so I'm back for my 5-year reunion. So a few housekeeping things before we get started. So first, I think from 2:30 to 5, there are a number of flex time events. So downstairs at registration, check those out. There's a listing of the different things that you can be involved in. So definitely check out the flex time events. Secondly, all of this is being recorded, and it's going to be on the school's website. I think there are signs, and you can see the video cameras. Because of that, when you have a question, make sure you give us your name, your program, your No, not your, not your social security number, your year, and make sure that you use the microphone so that they can hear you. So with that, they gave me a formal bio for Professor Rigobon, and as he's always admonished us, we're not supposed to call him Professor Rigobon, Roberto, but I'm not actually going to do that. He's world-renowned in the field of econometrics. But what I would like to say is when I was here in 2005, I took his macroeconomics class, and I took a SIP class. I can't remember exactly what it was on, but it was on econometrics. There were a number of people who came through. And the thing, I actually went and pulled up. He's won a number of outstanding teacher awards, and I went and found some of the wording. It says, he epitomized that fine line between madness and genius, wrote one student. Another said he made them laugh as well as cry, adding, the door of his office is always open as a friend, teacher, and colleague. So I was that first student who wrote the madness and genius piece. He never made me cry, but he definitely made me laugh. And he's definitely compassionate. I actually was one of the few students in my class to go into government, and I sat down and talked to him a whole lot before I made that decision. So without further ado, Roberto.
Thank you. First, thanks to everybody to be here on a Saturday at 9 a.m. That makes me really proud because that makes me realize that the nerdy gene has not been lost after you have left. I will be talking today about a project in which I have been working for about 9 years. And I have worked in from these different perspectives. And in those 9 years, they're going to keep picking me up, the police. So this is something that, I have been working for a long, long time. And I will try to show you kind of what we have been doing lately. But I would like this to be mostly a conversation rather than a presentation. Is that okay? According to my wife, this is very important. My wife is beautiful. She's from Venezuela. And she is an MBA. So she really thinks that my research completely and absolutely sucks. And to be honest, kind of she's correct, okay? But this particular research, I think, has something to do with humankind and with the problems that we are facing. And what we like to do is to go through why I think this problem is important and the way we're looking at this differently. And because I really think this touches everybody in a good way, not in the way you most of are thinking right now. I think that I prefer this to be a conversation afterwards. So I have prepared some slides. I rarely present slides. I want to actually show you what we're doing so you can see it on a web page. And in fact, you will be able to follow this in some of these web pages. And then I actually try to entertain your questions. And I think that will be the best. This is one of the highlights for me every year, being able to see old friends. And I'm really glad that Kerry doesn't remember at all what the SIP was. Because to be honest, I prefer to be remembered by my sense of humor rather than the content of my classes. I am an economist. How relevant can the content ever be? So if he remembers the jokes, that's fine with me. I made him cry. He just didn't want to recognize it. So what I want to do is to organize this conversation in 3 parts, and I will be talking mostly about inflation, okay? So I hope that everybody has had your coffee, okay, and have your personal affairs already cleaned up. I want to talk about 3 things in particular. First, I want to talk about the recovery from this financial crisis. We're living at a time which is very different from previous global crises. And the reason is that the recovery from this crisis is extraordinarily disorganized. We have countries that are already booming, countries that are still entering a crisis. So the process of recovery is taking a while for a lot of them. We have recoveries in the US that doesn't feel like a recovery, etc. So there's very different dimensions of this recovery. And this actually has had a very important impact on inflation rates and inflation rates disparities across the world. You have countries that have very high inflation rates, countries that have very low inflation rates due to the speed of this recovery. So I want to talk a little bit about how inflation is occurring and how it's different across countries. And then I want to talk about how we measure inflation in general. Okay, I want to talk about what are the challenges of measuring inflation, and then the way I want to say it is the way we do it here at MIT, or the way we do it with price stats. Price stat is a spin-off from our research, who is actually the place where we are doing the collection of all this data and doing most of the analysis. Okay, so that's kind of the goal. First, talk about the recoveries, and then talk about what we do. So it's very interesting because in the world we have 2 types of countries that are recovering. Some that are recovering very fast. Well, let me talk first the depressing part. Okay, some are recovering very slowly, so slowly that unemployment doesn't seem to be coming down. And this is kind of the United States is a very good example, but there's a lot of countries in Europe that actually are facing these challenges. I mean, according to the statistics, they are growing, but they are growing at speed that is so slow that they cannot absorb anyone from the labor force. So it just feels like you are spending, according to the statistics, we were out of the recession in June of 2009. That feels like, literally 2 seasons ago. So, and unemployment has come down, but at a very, very, very low pace. So, and in fact, what has not recovered at all in those countries is investment. So we have consumers are doing their job, they're actually purchasing a lot, but investment is not, and they have not recovered. A lot of that has to do with the fact that the financial system is still very weak in a lot of these countries, that regulation of the financial system is not very clear. Whatever the reason is, they are not recovering. On the other hand, you have countries that are recovering very fast, so fast that their consumption level today is higher than what they had in 2007. So the crisis was just a hiccup for them. Is that okay? Went down and up, they are already back to all irresponsible times. Okay? And so if they were irresponsible before the crisis, they are back there. And of course, Argentina and Brazil are part of that group. But what has happened is that because the recovery is very different, this tremendous increase in consumption has put pressures on prices. And those countries, the big challenge is inflation. Is that okay? So I want to show you 2 examples, not because they are the most prominent examples. They are 2 very big countries, okay? And this will explain a little bit the differences, how the Europeans are looking at this problem versus the way we are doing this in the United States. So I'm going to compare only US and Germany, but these are just 2 of the examples. So I want you to see a little bit of the crisis. This is actually production of the United States. And you see, that was the trend in the United States. You see the crisis, and the gap doesn't close between what they are today and what they were supposed to be. So this is the typical very slow recovery. And by the way, that trend is for all the 2000s. So that's not only the time of the bubble. So you have a country like the United States where the production, this has all been normalized, so you can see them easily. We had a crisis and there's no recovery. But you see countries like Germany where the gap is actually being closed. If I would draw this for China, the gap is completely recovered. That's production, okay? But then you said, well, maybe production is not the problem. What about consumption? It's very interesting because In consumption, United States still is lagging. So the gap has not closed, but you see Germany, they have already closed it completely. And then you ask investment, and investment in the United States, the gap is actually getting bigger and bigger, and in Germany, investment has just fully recovered. Okay? This is the bubble, okay? So you're investing above your typical investment, and in fact, they're already kind of reinvesting what they dropped in investment in the previous years. So very different patterns, because in the first country, in the United States, there is still important room for improvement. No, there's still a lot of room for fiscal expenditures, for low interest rates, etc. I mean, the country, if it's responding to protect their citizens, they will have a very different set of policies than Germany, where they said, well, we're already back in track, so let's get out of this economy. And there's no need to lower interest rate. There's no need to have fiscal expenditures, etc. And you can see that happening right now in England. You know, in the first quarter of this year, they were discussing let's cut expenditures. We don't need that much fiscal expenditures because the job has already been done. And that's what differentiates these two countries truly is the rate of inflation. The way you can detect this, who's recovering too fast, is by looking at the inflation rate. Countries on top have lower inflation rates than the countries on bottom, from their standards. Is that okay? From their typical inflation rates. So I believe that inflation rate is kind of the key of what is happening, and there's for two reasons. One is from the diagnostic point of view. I think that the inflation rate will allow us to determine who is the country, who is the place that is recovering too fast. But also, it's as a risk factor, it's very important. Because inflation rate, to be honest, affects every single asset class. So from the investment point of view, this is something that you have to be aware. And second, we don't have very good measures of how to protect ourselves from inflation rate. We have something that is called the Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, TIPS, T-I-P-S. But these instruments are not, I mean, they're good, but they're not the perfect hedge. So the question is, how do we hedge against inflation, especially if it's happening around the world and in different countries? So we have to pay attention to that. So let me just show you the world inflation rate, okay? So this is just the inflation rate compared to February the 1st of 2007. And you can see there's a spike of inflation in the world. So I mean, whatever the inflation rate was in 2007, this is the average of the world by their basket and the size of their economies. So you have the bubble, and you have this huge spike all over the world, going up and peaking in roughly July of 2008. And the world inflation was 4% bigger in July than it used to be at the beginning of 2006. Then you have the collapse, and now we're back to the same levels that we had on average in the world, the same levels that we had before the whole bubble started. Is that okay? Now we are at that inflation rate with higher levels of unemployment, with lower levels of inflation, and lower levels of investment, So what that means is that if something's going to happen is that when we recover those countries, when we recover employment, when we recover investment, there will be more pressures on inflation in the future, not less. Is that okay? Here, we already have the same inflation rate of 2006, and we have not fully recovered every country. And that includes, you know, a tiny country that is only 30% of the world, which is the US. You know? So in some sense, that's relatively high. So I want to first. So I mean, this is not new. If you go, in fact, there was a program yesterday on PBS. With Jim Lehrer, where they were actually talking about inflation. So everybody's talking about inflation today, no? And everybody's talking about, in fact, I think they interviewed me, so I was there. Yeah. Yeah, I was looking really hot, actually. So that just tells you the extraordinary technology we have. In fact, we are using right now one of the equipment that we used in that interview. I usually have a perfect British accent, okay? But But I didn't want you to feel bad because I had such a perfect English accent. So we have an equipment that transforms my accent to this horrible Latin American accent. But it makes sense. If I'm going to talk about inflation, I need a Latino accent. I mean, imagine if I had a German accent. It would be non-credible whatsoever. We are inflation of only 1.2%. It is just horrible. So we really need a Latino accent. So we're using this. My very close friend Britney Spears, she gave me this. She uses this for singing. Okay. We use it for accent. So everybody's talking about inflation. And if you pick the newspapers, you will see one newspaper after the other talking about the inflation. And they actually argue about what are the reasons behind the inflation, what is causing inflation. And they all have, do you have a question?
Sure. So my name is Morali.
You don't want a microphone. Yes.
Sure. My name is Morali. I'm undergrad class of 03 Sloan. And one thing, like, I see this seems to show like an aggregate, but that includes countries that are recovering and have inflation, as well as countries that are stagnating and have low inflation, right? So,
yes.
I don't know, I just, like you're saying like, it seems to suggest that we already have like inflation pressures right now. I would think it would be only the countries that are recovering, not across the board.
So that's what I said. In the first, what differentiates the countries that are recovering very fast from the ones that are recovering relatively slowly is that the inflation rate of the first group is much higher than the second group. Now, when I average the whole world, we are already at an inflation rate that is higher than what we had when everybody was booming. 2006, do you remember any country in crisis in 2006? You have to prove that you are an incompetent country. You were in recession. Yeah, I know. Yeah. And you, Hungary. Yes, Hungary was in recession. There you have one from Hungary. Yes, Hungary was in recession. But Hungary, of course, incompetence, correlation 1 and 1. Okay, so what happened in 2006 is that every country was booming, every country had relatively low unemployment, and today, without everybody recovered, we already have more inflation than then. So the message is, inflation is occurring now, but it will happen for the next couple of years. It will still be part of our everyday life. And therefore, you have to prepare yourself to understand it, to understand what the policies of each of these countries is going to be, and a little bit understand the causes, which is what I want to discuss now. So this is what I'm worried is that when I look at the average, if this average were negative, then I will be happy. I will say, well, there's room for a recovery in the world and not having inflation. But no, we are already at a level higher than February the 1st of 2007, January of 2007, which was already a time of boom. Just to give you an idea, the decade of the 2000s, between 2004 and 2006, was the first time in history in Latin America where all 26 countries grew. The only time in history of a 3-year span where Latin American countries, all of them grew. That's the size of the boom, not because we had good policies, okay? I can assure you, I am from Venezuela. Our policies were not that good. And my dad is from Argentina. I can assure you, our policies were not that good, okay? We kind of were trying to screw up our economies, but we are so incompetent that we cannot even do that properly. So, what I want to do is to talk about the reasons of inflation. And there's different reasons. So for developed nations, if you pick the newspapers, there will be 3 reasons. Mostly one will be about, commodity prices are very high, gas prices are killing us, okay? So that must be the explanation. By the way, that's not the explanation, and I want to go through it. Is that okay? Because this actually makes the news all every day. It is true that the price of gasoline at the pump is higher, but that doesn't explain why the bread is higher. Is that okay? Takes a while for that to impact. So I will talk a little bit about commodity prices. Second is about central banks. Central banks have printed a lot of money. Those bastards, miserable, irresponsible central bankers are causing inflation. Well, no, that's not the reason. They might be irresponsible bastards, but that has nothing to do with the inflation that we have today. Okay, so maybe I'm not denying the first. In developed nations, actually, I will argue that a lot of inflation is coming through fiscal and domestic expansion. Okay, so I will talk about that. And in developing nations, there's one more reason, which is capital inflows. Is that okay? And that is, you have countries like China and Brazil and Peru that are receiving tremendous amount of resources. So this is a way of increasing your demand, but it's not your own fault. Is that okay? Is that somebody from outside is just investing a lot in your country. So capital inflows is an explanation for developing. So I will argue that actually the reasons of the inflation that we're observing right now are mostly explained by fiscal expansions and demand expansions in these countries, and a little bit on capital inflows for the emerging markets. Okay, so let me go through each of them slowly, and I can take as many questions as you want. Commodity prices. Why commodity prices is not the explanation. Let's follow through an increase in prices in oil. Imagine that I have oil prices go up, and let's assume it goes up, they doubles, and permanently doubles. Is that okay? So there's no uncertainty. We got it at 50, goes up to 100, and will remain at 100 for the next 100 years. Well, things that happen in the US. Immediately when those prices go up, it takes about 2 or 3 weeks for prices at the pump to start to go up. Is that okay? Now, they don't go up fully. You have an impulse effect, and there's a delay. So you increase first a little bit 1 week, then you said, oh, the $100 are here to stay, so let me squeeze a little bit further, and then, oh, the $100 are here to stay, so they go and go on. There's a delay, but I mean, in about 3 months, they have fully increased the prices. That's roughly the time that it takes. Now, when gas prices are high, of course, the cost of transportation increases. Is that okay? Now, so I have a company that does transportation for, let's say, Procter & Gamble. Usually, those companies have contracts. And those contracts are stipulated, and they indicate more or less what the prices are. So it takes a while for that company first to decide to pass the additional cost to the client. And because this is a competitive environment, don't take my chair. Okay. Yes, I'll take something from you. So it takes a while. It takes a while for those companies to transfer the additional cost to the clients. I mean, those companies have margins, and for a while, what they do is they absorb part of that additional cost in their margin. And because of competition, they have to observe what the competitor is doing in order to transfer that price to Procter & Gamble. Well, wait a second, but then Procter & Gamble, when it has a higher cost, has to decide when to transfer that as a price to the retailers. And then the retailers have to decide when to transfer that to the consumers. So it takes about 18 months for the price of bread to fully adjust to the inflation rate of the commodities. So it takes a long time. And by the way, there's a lot of decisions here, and all of them are looking at the prices to determine, is this price of transportation high enough that deserves to recontract or renegotiate a contract? If this is a spike that lasts only 1 week, I don't want to upset my consumers, and that usually happens. For example, in Italy, it's very interesting, the price of pasta will only move in case, well, there's actually 2 cases. One is world destruction, okay? And the second one is civil riots, okay? That's it. There's no, if you increase the price of wheat, there's almost a civil revolution. This is happening right now in India with the price of onions, by the way. The price of onions has been going up in India very fast, and it's causing a tremendous amount of discomfort inside the country. This is a product that is essential for them. If you were selling products, vegetables, you will prefer to increase the price of everything else before increasing the price of onions. Is that okay? In fact, you can subsidize cheap price of onions by increasing the price of, well, they only eat onions, so this is kind of complicated, but let's assume they also eat rice, okay? So you will increase the price of rice to compensate for the negative revenues that are getting from onions. But what happened is that this is a process of a lot of decisions that depend on and depends on how permanent each of the stages thinks the process is going to be. And it also depends on what your competitors are doing. If your competitors are not increasing the prices, you're less likely to increase prices. And also it depends on the fact that I don't want to upset my customers. So every person that have done research in, this is called pass-through, they check 18 months. Oil prices have only 6 months going up. Sugar prices have, in fact, they are coming down right now, but anyway. But sugar prices have 6 or 7 months. So, of course, part of that inflation is already, has a small ripple effect in the economy, so it's already showing up in the economy. But the full extent of that commodity price into retail prices, into our consumption baskets, is not there yet. And we have had inflation for the last 4 months. So it cannot be explained by gas prices. Then when you look at monetary expansion, let me go to monetary expansion. This is I have some graphs. So this is a pass-through. It usually takes, they start reacting. This is on every commodity. I mean, I'm averaging everything. Is that okay? I'm averaging all the gas and food commodities and timber. Usually they start moving very slowly in the first 3 months. Then they pick up, and it's 18 months when they do. But so let me do about the monetary policy. And now this is very important because it is true that in the response to the financial crisis, central banks started printing cash and giving the cash to the banks. Is that okay? So, and in fact, that's why most governments are upset with the central banks because it's an implicit subsidy. I mean, and they feel that, I mean, this is the thought process of a typical politician. Said, we are in a crisis because the bankers were irresponsible, so the central bank is printing cash and giving the money away to the guys that cause our misery. That feels unfair. Is that okay? And in general, that's kind of the rhetoric, and I am very sympathetic to the rhetoric, but my wife works at the financial system, so I prefer her to get a lot of cash. It's not that I have a conflict of interest, or no, I mean, she doesn't work in the financial system. So, but they have actually printed a lot of resources. Just to give you an idea, in beginning of September of 2008, just before the crisis, the Central Bank of the United States had in the streets about $850 billion of cash. Is that okay? That was the cash that everybody's holding. Banking system, foreign banks, foreign individuals, and US consumers. 850, give or take. Is that okay? And that was a flat line for 3 years. That number in December of 2008, that's 3 months after the crisis, okay, was $1.6 trillion. They doubled the amount of cash in a span of 3 months in response to the crisis. They replenished the cash in the banking system. That number today is about $2.2 trillion. So it's not like they have stopped. Is that okay? So they have continued printing. So we observe a significant amount of printing. In the United States, they tripled the amount of cash. That should have an impact on the value of the exchange rate, value of the dollar, should have an impact on inflation, etc. In England, you know, there's always a competition between the United Kingdom and the United States, you know? Like, what? You printed currency? Yeah, but I can print more. So indeed, in the UK, they were not satisfied with just doubling or tripling the amount of cash. They quadrupled the amount of cash. And they said, if you increase it, I will quintuple, because I can always be very irresponsible. And said, we can always bring, you know, the Central Bank of Argentina to print for us. Then there will be no stopping, ever. So, I mean, you know, the Germans and the French are less competitive, so they only double the amount of cash. I mean, they said, we're not here for competition. We are here mostly to protect the French citizens, and therefore we are not going to print too much, only 2. No, but only... That's like 1 trillion euros. So it's not like, oh, I'm restraining myself, okay? So there's a tremendous amount of cash. Now, when that causes inflation, if the cash goes to a bank and the bank holds the cash in the safe deposit, because they are scared or anticipating a restructuring, etc., that doesn't cause inflation. The cash causes inflation the day the resources go to the banks and the banks lend the money to you. And then you have an excess amount of cash, you have excess credit, and then you consume a lot. But if the cash just goes and is, imagine that I will steal in the money, which, by the way, I'm just getting a small cut. But then, so imagine that I'm stealing all the money, I get all the cash from the central bank, and I hold the cash in my hands. That will never make it to you. You don't even know if the cash has been printed. You only see it on the news, but you don't have it in your hands. Is that okay? So what I want to do is to do the Jerry Maguire theorem of life, which is show me the money, okay? Who has the money? Now, this information I'm going to show you is extraordinarily confidential. Is that okay? It's extremely hard to get. I mean, if you are really, really good, you might get it in a place called Wikipedia, okay? And if you type Federal Reserve balance sheet in Wikipedia, these numbers appear. So it's very difficult to get, okay? By the way, the Federal Reserve publishes this weekly in their webpage, okay? So this is, this I think last 3 days delay. It's just no delay. Japan has a much bigger delay because of their policies. Not I mean, the way of the law about revealing information and transparency are different from the United States. In England, I think it's every 2 weeks. In ECB, it's every week. So this information is totally public. Is that okay? Now, what I'm going to do is to show you a graph. Now, this is very difficult to see because these are small numbers, okay? So I want to show you the amount of cash that the banks were holding. Is that okay? So before the crisis, from that 850, about 50 billions were held in financial systems. Is that okay? That's everything. Insurance companies and banks and everything. It's about 50. It fluctuates, of course, but it's only $50 billion. So the line is kind of very small. You see my point? I mean, from 850, only 50, it's just, the line is just small. So I'm going to put in blue an area that reflects the cash in the hands of any citizen of the world. Is that okay? So that's us and all the foreigners that are holding cash. That includes the drug lords, by the way. Because the drug lords cannot get dollars without we printing them. Is that okay? So everybody, this is everybody. Every citizen, every typical consumer will be in blue. There will be a line in red, an area in red, which is the cash that the banks have. Is that okay? And our task, by the way, we are using this now at MIT. You see, we're so integrated at MIT, we're using this as an eye exam now on. Is that okay? When you go to these places, they don't ask you, well, can you read A, B, and C? They say, can you detect where the cash is? Which actually is more exciting. I mean, we're talking about $2 trillion. So let's find where the cash is. I mean, we would like to know. So I'm going to show you I'm going to show you the US, UK, and England, just to, US, England, and the European Central Bank, just to show you the differences. Is that okay? Now, is that clear? So I need you to pay a lot of attention to the red line. It's kind of very difficult to see, okay? The red area, okay? So this is added. So I will have the blue on the bottom, which is the consumers, and try to detect the increase in the cash of the banking system. Are you ready? Okay, this is it. So can you see it?
Yes, sir.
Do you need the glasses? No, sure. Okay, so first, who has the cash? The banking system. They have not released. Now, the darker line on top is what is printed. That's about $2.2 trillion on top here at the end. This is the data on January the 1st of this year, okay? So this point here would be 10/12. So this is just very recent data. I just put the monthly data. Again, you can do it the weekly. So they printed a significant amount of cash. By the way, this is August of 2008. They just printed the cash. This quantitative easing 1, quantitative easing 2, and quantitative easing 3, and so on. You can just even see them. And so what is happening is that the banks are so weak that they are hoarding cash. They still have fear about what is going to happen. So they are hoarding the cash. So the central bank is printing to try to mitigate those fears. But the banks are not lending yet. So it has not made it to you.
Isn't that the contraction of the multiplier
Well, it is, yes. But the multiplier, so he's asking about, is this the contraction of the multiplier that has been reported in the newspapers? The multiplier is the outcome of dividing total credit divided by this massive amount of number. So I prefer to look at the choices rather than some statistic that is a little bit too endogenous. Is that okay? So this statistic is, nobody in the banking sector ever makes a decision on the board. Imagine the Citibank board. What do you think will be the decision? They will say, I think we should lower our multiplier from 14 to 2. Or you think that they said, no credit. If the guy has hair, no credit. I have just recently refinanced, of course. But, I mean, it's just very simple. This is by the way, this is the sum of all the financial system. So this includes insurance companies, this includes everyone in the financial system. Because still we don't feel that we are out of the recession through the financial system, they are holding the cash in anticipation of whatever restructuring is required. They don't know exactly what the law is going to be. They don't know exactly what the cost of that law will be. So if you were in that circumstance, do you want to lend? No, you hold cash in preparation for that adjustment. Is that okay? So now, this is totally, completely different in the UK. Yeah, and this is European Central Bank. So the reason is these spikes are the different crises in the different countries. So you have France, Germany, England. I mean, you have so every single country, okay, all the expansion, or most of that expansion was held in the banks. So that has not made it yet. So mostly the reasons are about capital inflows. Let me just show you a little bit of oh, you have a question. This is the Chilean.
Yeah.
The central bank. Did the central bank from Chile send you to ask me a question?
No, I'm just an infiltrate. The question is this because of the rules that are about to change?
Yeah.
And then the financial system is holding back on that?
Yeah.
And
it's also about the rhetoric.
Okay,
I mean,
but if this is a matter of rules, and how do you get the rules to be changed as fast as possible in order to pass liquidity through to the economy?
You see, I knew this question from a Chilean who was trying to trap me into saying something nice about Chile. I knew this. So there's two parts of the banking. I mean, this is my conjecture. Is that okay? So first is the rhetoric. The rhetoric is very negative against the financial system. Is that okay? Have you found any person in these meetings that proudly tells you, oh, I work in the financial system? I mean, they try to hide it. They said, I'm unemployed. Because if by any chance they know you're in the banking system, say, oh, I work in Citibank, immediately everyone else said, in the 150 years of MIT's birthday, we had 2 assassinations and, mugging. And it's very interesting, actually, in Europe, this rhetoric is just absolutely horrible. I mean, I have pictures. I didn't bring the pictures of the prime minister in France when she was asked about what message would you give to the French, and she said to the French banking system, and she said, "Well, I have 3 messages, okay, to them. First, and instead, how you say first in the United States? First. In Germany, you say first. Can you guess which finger she raises first?" I do not know that much about French communication signs, but that is a weird finger to raise as the first one. And surprisingly, she stopped there. So I have a picture. I didn't have the picture here. I have the picture of her. It's just, the reason is that there's so much hate against the financial system that everybody's concerned about what is going to come out of this process. Because if the regulation is too lenient, you will have too many groups in every country complaining about the fact that you were too lenient against the banking system. Yes. So we don't know exactly what the rules. Now, there were countries that were very pragmatic, and this is the trick of the question. The best example on earth is actually Chile. They were very pragmatic. And in this particular case, getting out of a crisis, pragmatism just buys you a lot. In Chile, they said, well, the world had a financial crisis because we were creating these instruments that nobody understands. So, therefore, the new regulation of the banking system is the following. You can take deposits, you can give credits, you can raise capital, and nothing else. Surprisingly, the banking system immediately started, reallocating the resources. It was very clear what the new regulation is. And they said, when we decide what you're going to do next, we will notify you. Okay? Now, here we want to regulate the payment of the CEOs. Here we want to regulate the allocation of the portfolios. I mean, some people says you have to, there's some loans that can go to real estate with percentages and quotas. That's actually tremendously distortionary. So if you're in a banking system, what you do is you say, well, I give no credits until I know what the actual rules of the game are going to be. Now, the rules of the game are being discussed, and that creates more fear, because the discussion of the rules says this is not enough, and they're a little bit too extreme. By the way, this has happened in all countries every time. In the last 800 years that we have any information whatsoever, every time there's a financial crisis, regulation overshoots consistently. So it's not unreasonable to think that in this financial crisis, regulation will overshoot. Now the question is how far it's going to go in the regulatory. By the way, we're going to dismantle that 5 years from now. I can assure you that. Yes, because we will realize that it's too costly. I was once in Brazil, at Congress in Brazil, and Brazil has just discovered a humongous oil field called Pre-Sal on the outside of Rio de Janeiro. This is humongous oil field, 50 billion barrels. This will make Brazil something like the 6th largest producer of oil on earth. So it's a humongous amount of oil. And I was talking to this congressman. They were all men. And they were saying like, oh, we are so concerned because, all this amount of resources and this oil is a curse. It will kill us. If we produce all this oil, that will make our Brazil look exactly like Venezuela. We don't want to look like Venezuela. And if we produce too much oil, we will look like a combination of Venezuela and Argentina. And that's worse. And if we produce even more, we will become Iraq. Please, I don't want to produce. And, the guys were just freaking out, of course. And I said, well, there's an easy solution. Do not produce. And they look at me and say, well, but that's kind of stupid. I said, well, yeah. But if you look at the problem of production oil, the way you are looking at it, I mean, obviously the outcome is don't produce. Now you can look at the problem of producing oil and develop the institutions so you can handle that. But in general, when we don't understand something very well, we tend to forbid it. During, I think it was Nixon. During Nixon, inflation rate in the United States reached 4%. And because they didn't know what to do with that, they put price controls. Yeah, price controls will affect inflation rate for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, you're done. So in general, when we don't understand something, our politicians tend to forbid, act like lawyers. And they say, well, if I don't understand it, I just change the regulation. If I don't like inflation, inflation is forbidden. You must follow the rules. Why you didn't follow the rules? From which country are you from?
India.
Of course. So the point is, as you can see, I am a very politically correct person. So in general, we tend to overreact, and I think that in this particular crisis, this has been so damaging that I expect an overreaction. And then 3 years, we will understand that we overreacted, that we're producing too little oil in Brazil. We'll say, well, that's stupid. well, let's just change the regulatory framework in such a way that we can do this better. And we can do this better, certainly. But there's no willingness today, to listen at the possibility of having a vibrant financial system. Is that clear? When you put that in a sentence, they said, no, vibrant because we threw some radioactive material to them. That's the only thing that should be vibrant. But except for that, so the combination of we know the rhetoric is bad and the fact that we will overreact is leading to very little lending. And that's the accumulation that you have. So capital is tracking emerging markets. Let me talk about this in a second. And the way I did it was to use some system dynamics kind of framework, because it makes me look smarter, like, let's do system dynamics. This is a system, it's all interrelated. Yes, it is. No? So what usually is happening to these countries is that because of the difference of the recoveries, the United States interest rate, I have here this new technology. Okay, so the interest rate of the United States is much lower than the interest rate of emerging markets. And what that means, and on top of that, the emerging market is growing and the US is not growing that fast. So this has two implications. First, the exchange rate of the emerging market, let's call Brazil, the real in Brazil is going to get stronger. And the interest rate is higher. So if I borrow $100 here and send that to Brazil, I will get two profits. The interest rate is higher, and I will get the strengthening of the currency. And by the way, this is called carry trade. And everyone that works in the hedge funds have taken my class. And there's one class in which I said, this is what you should do. So they send the money to Brazil. So there's capital inflows to Brazil, okay? Now, Brazil gets all these capital inflows. They have no idea what to do. But Brazil says, what should we do with this inflow? Should we invest it in something that is productive and that will improve our standards of living of the generations to come? Or should we have a party? Wow! So they have a party. So the demand just goes up to infinity, okay? They start demanding everything, eating more, inflation rises, and because inflation rate in Brazil goes up, then the central bank of Brazil increases the interest rate, which makes this even worse. And this cycle has been just, this is called a reinforcing loop. Anyway, so, wait, I have to do my John Sturman impersonation. Okay, so. So we have a reinforcing loop here. So what happened is that this creates a strengthening of that currency, and the response has been, because it's very difficult to respond to that, is to forbid the capital inflows. And we have a lot of countries that are actually putting capital controls to inflows. This is so difficult to manage for these small countries that they say, please, don't send me the money. They are doing like the Brazilians. I have no idea how to deal with the production of oil, so let's not produce. And this is putting tremendous pressure in emerging markets. So part of the inflation of emerging market is coming from the fact that the recovery is so different that one guy has already a very high interest rate, the other one has a tiny interest rate. It's called carry trade. Happens every year, but in this particular recession, this particular recovery has exacerbated these differences. And these are very weird countries. I mean, Peru, nobody would have thought that Peru should be a place for investment. It's not. Who will ever do anything in Peru? No. But the Peruvians give you higher interest rates. Then let's send the money there. It's not like, actually, I want to build a factory. Are you kidding me? Do something that you can get out of that crappy country as fast as possible. Yes?
Yeah, so I'm kind of slow, so it's about what you were saying about the financial regulation that we overshoot. I was thinking that the financial crisis happened not because of lack of credit, but there was a misassessment of risk and a lot of off-balance sheet engagement, and there's no regulation in that field. So I feel even if they over-regulate, they're not going to solve the problem. Like it could happen again.
So that's a great question. So I don't have do I have a job? Yes. There's a lot of, I want to write it down because we might come back to that. Is that okay? So let me have a short response to that. I do think it's fine to do overregulation after you don't understand what is happening. But I could tailor that overregulation to a certain type of instruments. I could perfectly say, well, there's no more securitization of mortgages. You see, you could overregulate the sector you don't understand. But right now, we're overregulating, incentives inside the banking system that will affect promotions. It will affect the human capital and the permanency of the individuals. This is like saying every single doctor should earn the same amount of money. Well, no. I prefer neurosurgeons to earn way more than, the nurse practitioner. Why? Because I believe they have different human capital. So the fact that one earns 100 times the other will create incentives for people that are, the best prepared to follow neurosurgeons as opposed to nurse practitioners. So the same happened in the banking sector. We are overregulating things based mostly on our disappointing, or I don't want to call it hate, is that okay? But it's our tremendously bad feelings about the managers that made those decisions. So yes, they mishandled risk, yes. The credit rating agencies did not rate this properly, had wrong incentives. The insurance companies that were offering the insurance did not have the right incentives, and they made mistakes valuing that risk. There was a lot of mistakes in the securitization of subprime lending, and that has to be changed. Absolutely, that has to be changed. But I will prefer to the Chilean way, that says the normal business was okay. For example, securitization of student loans. Was that bad? That was good for 60 years. Extremely important. In fact, if the securitization of student loans did not exist, a lot of you guys would have not been able to study. So there's nothing wrong with securitizing student loans. That market we understand. But now, anything that has the word securitization is unholy. Surprisingly, by every religion. So even the ones that have no God, that's ungodly. Oh, but your religion has no God. Well, we will create a God so we can call this ungodly. So the point is, we are overreacting. Even for things that we understood correctly, we are trying to overregulate. So, but it's understandable. I am in the academic board of Standard & Poor's, which we will go and talk to kind of the managers, the executives, and we are like 5 academics, and mostly what we do is kind of analyze how you can create self-regulation. That's our purpose of our committee, and we were doing that before the crisis, and credit rating agencies knew that we have a very bad regulation system, and over competition in this market is actually killing our incentives. So in some sense, it could have been anticipated. We could have done a better job, but that's the place where I want the actions to happen, not on student loans. Yes.
I just want to make a comment on people getting angry.
It's rightfully so.
That Allen Sloan 89. I had to broker the agreement and the meeting between the BP Board of Directors and the President for the $20 billion escrow fund for the claims account during the oil spill. And it's a rather uncomfortable meeting, as you might well imagine, but I got the CEO of BPSI, Bob Dudley, and I said 2 things that reflect what you said about governments. The first thing I said is there's been a market failure and you're responsible. 2 things are going to happen. You're going to lose discretion. You're going to have terms dictated to you. Get over it.
That's it. Yeah.
It's not going to be rational. I think there's a penchant for the media coming together with political leaders and engaging in what I have started to term societal grieving, and that caused some aberrant behavior.
Yeah. So, second, let me complement and finish this, and we can come back if you want. Second aspect, is this going to happen again? Absolutely, yes. Will there be another financial crisis? Yes. Will it be with subprime mortgages, securities? No. It will be something different. There's absolutely, this has 2 has two good things. First, I think crises are a cleansing process, okay? That where we restructure our economies and we get rid of companies that should not exist, etc. So crises are kind of the only process where economies are able to break social contracts. We had a promise, we're in a state of emergency, so let's revise our social contract, like retirement age in Europe, etc. So crises have played that purpose. So I think it's good that they play that purpose. And second, the second very important aspect of crisis is that they allow me to write the exact same paper 10 years later. I just do search and replace, and I send the same paper, another publication. I mean, I have 5 publications exactly done like that. The exact same methodology, I just change the name of the country. I don't even change the data, who cares? Very useful. So, but capital controls is something that is happening in almost every country. Almost every country is discussing capital controls or central bank interventions because they're trying to deal with this spiral. And it's very, very difficult. Actually, central banks have to change tremendously the way they operate to be able to break this. And every country has that. Chile is having that problem, Peru, Brazil, China, Australia. They are all facing this tremendous pressure for internal inflation. So the professor, student. You are a student. If I'm a professor, I'll call you by your title,
okay.
Or your former title.
Former title, how are you? How do you break that cycle?
No, you can't. No, you can't. So the only way to break it is not to allow international financial transactions. So there's no way to break it. Because if you allow the exchange rate to strengthen tremendously, then your whole exporting sector will disappear, which is more or less what happened in South Africa every 2 or 3 years. Okay, so that is not a good idea. So in general, no, you cannot break it. And this is the outcome of this disorganized process of recovery. That one guy has very high interest rates versus the other one that has very low interest rates. So that tremendously disorganized process creates the possibility of an arbitrage. Well, I mean, not necessarily an arbitrage, but at least in expectations, very high profits, and they just take care of that. Yes?
And how does the fact that most of the EM currencies are pegged to the dollar play into that? Yes,
so the question is very good. A lot of these emerging market currencies, let me rephrase the question because they have a microphone. But her question is, well, this is, in some sense, this is exacerbated by the fact that some of these countries, actually the exchange rate is pegged. So the risk of devaluations is very small, and now I have a difference of interest rate that are bigger. The important aspect here, more than the exchange rate, is the probability of default. I mean, Greece has a higher interest rate than Germany. Do you think that a lot of money is going right now to Greece? Who is investing in Greece? Why, you hate the Greek? Huh? Well, I mean, but you see, in the case of Greece, the high interest rate is not because they are booming. It's because we know they are going to restructure, by the way, in 10 minutes. We never know exactly when it's going to happen, but soon, very soon, they're going to restructure the debt. There's going to be a haircut. And therefore, that interest rate is higher for default. In the case of emerging markets, even the ones that are pegged or not, the higher interest rate does not reflect higher risk. It reflects the fact that, you know, in their economy, transitorily, inflation is too high. That's why it's very difficult to correct. Okay, let me talk then now about inflation. Yes, last question. This is the official view from Argentina.
First of all, I'm very jealous of Peru. But
an Argentinian is very jealous of Peru, yeah.
Maximum 2006. The question is, what is the connection between higher rate differential in Peru, for example, and why someone from abroad would want to open a factory or invest in a company, acquire a business?
So the difference is the following. If I go to the country with capital inflows and I create a factory, 2 things are going to happen. First, demand goes up. Is that okay? Because I have to hire workers to construct the factory. But presumably, I mean, let's assume the factory is a good investment, has good investment, is a good investment. Is that okay? So the existence of the factory will increase productivity in the country. and that will increase the supply. Is that okay? So when I do a greenfield factory, a greenfield investment, so I go to the country and I said, okay, let me hire some workers and some raw material to build a factory, okay, that creates higher demand. But on the other hand, this factory will increase the productivity of our workers, which means that implicitly I'm increasing supply. So when I do actual productive investments, there's an increase in the demand and an increase in the supply. The pressures on inflation are much smaller. Now, let's assume that I go with the capital to Peru, and they said, well, let's build something, okay? And what should we build? Well, let's build a building. But that will have no impact on productivity. But who cares? It has a great view. And no, but I mean, shouldn't we be investing in education? No, you should never do that. Right? So, education is totally overrated. But health, this is the only population control we have in Peru, so let them die. And so, I mean, when you take all this demand and you have no impact on productivity, then you have the full impact of inflation. And a lot of these capital inflows are very short-term. They don't want to be invested in long-term because their motivation is short-term differences of interest rate. So they want to be able to get out as fast as possible. So they are never invested in long-term productivity. So the investment that was taking place in China in the 80s and the 90s, that was higher demand but higher productivity. So the inflation rate was high. I'm not saying it was small, but it was kept at bay. The difference is an investment that is entirely driven to consumer credit and to things that have less impact on productivity. By the way, not all housing is bad. Is that okay? If I look at Brazil, there's a lot of places in Brazil where or Peru, where I could improve infrastructure and housing, and that will increase the productivity of citizens. Are you with me? Now, that is not a new apartment building in Lima. No, okay? And so the problem is that these choices are about things that are short-term, very liquid, that I can sell very fast, and they have no reason for productivity. A little bit of what is happening in Argentina is exactly that. You see a lot of construction, but a lot of buildings, but in the wrong places. Let me talk about inflation for a second. Is that okay? So the conclusion is that inflation is here to stay, and then let me go and talk about price stats. And man, it's so good to see you. Yeah, yes, you're always. I remember you. You were always late to every class. Yes.
There you go.
I am so glad you.
Habits are so hard to change, Robert.
Yeah, no, yeah. It is. Yeah, yes. Good to have you here. How was the drinking yesterday? Was it good?
Hard.
Yeah. What we do I have been working in inflation for 9 years, and mostly my research was looking at official statistics, okay? So I was going to every country and getting the data from the statistical offices that they use to construct the CPI, okay? Let me tell you more or less how this is done. I'm going to talk about the United States, but this is roughly the same in every country, okay? And by the way, the Census and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which are our two statistical offices in the United States, are by far the best statistical offices on earth. This is the best quality, the best economists, the best statisticians. This is the state of the art of how we do it. Is that okay? So there's one lady at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, no, at the Census. There's one lady at the Census. She has 6,000 kids. Well, they call it interviewers, but actually they are her kids, okay? And these guys goes to the stores, and they do all the surveys of the U.S. They do price collection or the census or everything, no? So these kids go, well, nano kids, some of them are older, but anyway, her kids go, and they now have an iPad, so they look cool, okay? But anyway, but before it was just a little piece of paper, and they go to store, and they look for an item, and they just look at the item and say, oh, this purse, take the brand, and take the price, and just write the price. Or ask the person on the store, what is the price of this item? And then they go to the next store, and they look at this camera, say, well, this is a Sony CyberShot, this is the specification, what is the price of this? And they just write it down. And then you go that city by city, they do that. And they collect 80,000 items like that, from hotels to education, to health, to food, etc. And this is 80,000 items. We are the country that collects the most prices. Now, this is physically going to cities, different zip codes to collect this information. It's extraordinarily costly. But anyway, but this is the way it's done. Is that okay? And they want to actually know what is the price. And by the way, for cars, it's not that they collect the sticker price. They talk to the concessionary and they said, well, you know, what is the average price of an Audi 4 2.0T standard automatic gray black are the cheapest ones anyway. So they said, tell me the price of that one. Said this was the average price at which we sold, these were the conditions at which we sold, and then they compute a price. And they compare that to the Audi the previous month, and that will compute the inflation rate of the Audi. Is that okay? Now, the census takes all this data, and they give this to the Bureau of Labor Statistics that have extraordinary economists that take that, they compute the average increases in all the prices, they actually look at the changes in specification of the cybershot, because get what happened. I had the old cybershot on my iPad. I show up to the store and said, do you have the cybershot model 3622? No. What? Has been discontinued. What? Do you sure you're not selling it? No, it has been discontinued. What do I put on the iPad? Any number between 1 and 2,000. No, what should I do? Said, oh, that was substituted by a new cybershot. Give me the specifications of the new cybershot. That has more memory, higher speed, more megapixels. I write that down, I put a price. Now, these two items are not the same. So somebody has to tell you how much of the change in the price is actually inflation, how much of the change in the price is the fact that you have more memory or faster camera. Is that okay? So that is not a simple exercise, and these guys just collect and organize that information. Just to give you an idea, the Bureau of Labor Statistics spends $254 million only doing that, only computing the CPI. Then after you have the price of every item, then they go and they have a survey about what each individual in the United States consumes, depends on the city, your income level, your zip code, your municipalities, and therefore now with these prices that are both locally and in the whole United States, they compute hundreds and hundreds of inflation rates. The inflation rate for the young, for the old, for the young in San Francisco, which includes a lot of weed, and, and so the old in Texas, and so on. So they compute for every city, and this is all public data. Is that okay? So these guys compute hundreds of inflation rates. We usually pay attention to two. One is what is called the headline inflation, which is called CPI-U. Okay? This is the code CPI-U. And the other one is that you probably have heard is called core CPI, but it's CPI core. Have you heard about that? No? And the difference between CPI-U and the CPI core is actually 4 different letters. No, I'll explain in a second. But the core inflation rate is the inflation rate that happens at the core, and the CPI-U is what happens at the U, which is the Miami University inflation rate. No, so this is the overall inflation rate of the average citizen of the United States. This is this rate without things that are related to commodities, which is food and gas, mostly. Okay? But there's other things that they take out. But things that are related to commodities are excluded from here. And there are important reasons why you want to do that, but there's also communicational issues that have become a challenge lately. Because this inflation rate right now in the United States is about 6%. If you take the last 4 months and compute that, annualize that, this is about 6%, this is about 2%. Too big of a difference. In fact, this is less than 2, this is more than 6. I'm just looking at the closest bounds. So you see, consumers in the street feel 6. Because I don't know if you guys, but most of you eat food. No? And do you use transportation? Yes. So I mean, so you are subject to a different inflation rate. But this is what actually the central bank can affect. So I can talk about this later. But anyway, I wanted to explain the procedure. Is that okay? Now, to all this procedure, it takes about a month and a half. From the moment you start collecting until the moment you release the information, takes about a month and a half for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Germany is way faster, just to give you an idea. Germany releases, Brazil is the fastest on earth. They release 5 days after the end of the month. That's either extraordinary efficiency or they are just making up the numbers. I think it's efficiency. Has to be efficiency. But Brazil is the fastest one on earth. But Germany releases 10 to 12 days after, and United States about 15 to 17 days after the end of the month, etc. What we do with price stats is that instead of sending people to the stores, we send computers to the online stores. And then we download every single day all the items that are sold by that company, 100% of them. So when we don't collect from Amazon.com, but that allows me to put Amazon as an example. Is that okay? We don't tell from which stores we collect, and the reason is that we are not in the business of telling you where you can buy the shirt cheaper. Is that okay? We're not in price comparison, and because we're not doing price comparison, we actually have a different relationship with the stores than the typical internet company that is doing market intelligence, mostly to do price comparison. But let me talk about Amazon just to give you an example. When you connect to Amazon, they sell 23 million electronics and electrodomestic items in 14 different countries or 14 different sites and 14 different currencies, by the way. We could collect all 23 million every single day without a single problem, okay? And they sell something like 30-something million books, and I don't know how many CDs, but probably you need one more digit on CDs and DVDs, and so on. So they sell millions and millions of items every single day. And there's an advantage of collecting the universe of items, because the problem that I just described, by the fact that the model has been discontinued, is totally resolved by collecting every day and by collecting the universe of all cameras. Because the substitution only happens in certain models. It's a very rare event when you look at this at daily frequency. Is that okay? If I look at this monthly, probably electronics last only 6 to 9 months in the store. In Best Buy, how long will a computer last in the store? 6, 9 months, 12. So if you collect the data monthly, then the event of discontinuation is once every 6 to 12 observations. Daily data, that's an event that almost never happens. Is that okay? And furthermore, when you are collecting only one model, the likelihood that that model will disappear in a year is 1, okay? But if I'm collecting 23 million, well, now, yes, it's 1 every 23 million, every 2 days, etc. It's a very rare event. So this is the advantage of we are correcting for part of the issues of the way of the data is collected. But second, we collect absolutely every day. We collect around the world with the exact same technology. And now, let me just say how this started. This started with Alberto Cavallo. He's a junior faculty here at MIT. Alberto Cavallo is the son of Domingo Cavallo, who is the Minister of Finance. He was the Minister of Finance of Argentina. This current government of Argentina hated Alberto's dad, okay, and made the life of Alberto's dad miserable, with prohibitions of leaving the country, etc. No, so that government intervened the statistical office to lie about their inflation rate because it has repercussions on the cost of the debt, and what those guys did, they just affected the way the statistics is computed, such a way that they report half of the inflation rate. The interest on the debt is the inflation rate plus 2 points. So if you lie about the inflation rate, then you are kind of saving a lot of money for the government. So they intervene. Alberto, not motivated by rage or hate or revenge whatsoever, okay? That never happened. You know that, no? So he devised a methodology of how to compute this, okay? And he did it for Argentina. He came to me as a research project, and then we just revamped this, and now we collect 70 countries, more than almost 1,000 retailers. And when I call about retailers, these are IKEA will be one of the stores that we collect. It's fine, I can say, because I have always asked for permission to name them, but this is one retailer that operates in 25 countries. Apple operates in 27 countries, so that's one retailer. So when you have Zara, Carrefour, etc., I have a huge amount of countries being represented, and we collect on almost every sector except services. This has to be prices that are either sold online or they are posted online. Okay, like gasoline, for example. In the United States, gasoline, AAA reports every single day what is the average price of the AAA drivers paid in every city in the United States. We collect that information. So with that, what we do is we construct inflation rates. What we do is roughly there's a web page, and we convert that into a database that then can be managed. And let me just go and show you the web page so you can actually see how it looks like. Is that okay? So things that we have done with this that I know you might think that I'm biased, but I think they're really, really cool. Okay? So first, we construct indexes for some of the countries. So let me just show you United States. This is our secure web page, so you don't have access to this, but I'll show you later where you have access. Is that okay? But this is our inflation rate of the United States and the official one. The orange is our color, blue is the color of the Democrats. So this is our inflation rate for the United States. I want to show you some cool things about this. First, this was designed by Alberto, who is the mother of all nerdy individuals. Is that okay? Okay, so we can do a zoom at any point. In fact, you can stand up on everywhere and you will see the date underneath and the number of our index. But you can actually go and look at that event. You see, there's an event where this seems to go down, no? It would be nice to know which day was that one. So let's ask, when did Lehman Brothers went bankrupt? September?
15, 2008.
Give me 5. September. You were there. It's your fault. We want your name now.
Esther Wagner, 2006.
You didn't take my class.
Yes, I did. I'm Jose Klicksberg's wife.
Oh, it was my fault. I apologize. I should have known that. Okay, so September 15 of 2008. That's actually correct. And our peak, ladies and gentlemen, happens on September 16 of 2008. Of course, is that cool or what? Woo! So, now, unfortunately, we had this research not done at that time. There was a tiny delay, so we didn't make money. But the point is, we were at that time we were mostly concerned with collecting the data. And is that okay? We had not analyzed the data at the time. We started analyzing the data July of last year, truly. So it was just after the fact that we saw this peak, and we really thought there was something wrong. But all our retailers, and we follow hundreds of retailers in the United States, lower their prices significantly. If we would have had, look how different is our path. See, we kind of move earlier than the BLS, no? But then they catch up. So what happens? By the way, this is also what is happening right now in the United States. This is since December of last year. We have an inflation rate that is higher than the inflation rate of the BLS, but the BLS has already caught up with us. So if you look at this number, if you look at the inflation rate from here to here, okay, the BLS has the exact same inflation rate that we have right now. And we have a lot of countries here, and so I know that I have some Brazilian friends in the audience, so let me just show you Brazil. No. Would you expect that the Brazilians are liars, manipulating bastards? Yes, they are. But they are. But I know that as an Argentinian. I know they are manipulative, liars, cheaters. And that's why we computed Brazil first. I wanted to find evidence. But unfortunately, no, there's no evidence. It's very disappointing, so I have stopped this research. If there's any good evidence about this country, I am erasing it, okay? But the other thing, this is our webpage that we use to finance this project. This project has grew so much that it was too difficult for MIT to support it. It was just out of our hands. Is that okay? I spent, in 1 year and a half, I spent all year and a half asking for money. And it was never enough to pay for the programmers, to pay for the computer. I mean, this is a lot of computing power. We do it in a cloud. but it was extraordinarily costly. So we created a company, and the web page that I just showed you is a company, and so we don't release that information. You don't have access to that information. That company is called PriceStat, and we've signed an agreement 2 weeks ago with State Street Bank, which is a custodian, and that partnership will allow us to have this data forever. Now, there are benefits because we will release that information with a delay. We will release that information for researchers. I mean, that's part of the agreement, is that we have somebody collecting the data. Is that okay? But that we can actually use it for the good of humankind. Okay, that's our most important motivation. And I just want to show you something that we did right after the earthquake in Japan happened. The first thing that we did, by the way, this was an idea that was given to us by the president of the Central Bank of Chile. His name is Jose de Gregorio. He's a very close friend of mine. Of course, I have very good, cool friends, you know. But anyway, so, well, not cool, important and uncool. Anyway, I don't know if you ever have dinner with a central banker, but there's nothing more boring than that. Well, probably a movie from Sweden, but that's it. So anyway, when the earthquake occurred in Chile, they called us. No, in Chile first, in Chile. When the earthquake happened in Chile last year, the central banker had helped us contact a lot of these companies so they can give us the information. Is that okay? So what the central bank did, immediately, he calls me and said, Roberto, can you tell me what my inflation rate is? And can you tell me, because you're collecting 100% of the items in the stores, can you tell me what is the product availability? Because when the store has no products, they say out of stock. Kind of simple to detect they are out of stock, no? So can you actually compute what is happening to my economy? And I said, you want every product? He said, no. And he gave me a list of products that he wanted to understand what was happening to the price of water, grains, etc. Very basic products, were about 30, 40 products. Construction materials, no? That was very important for him. And we gave him that information. But for Japan, we didn't get the call from Japan, but we decided to actually do it and actually show it publicly. In the case of Chile, I mean, it's sold, so it makes no sense to show it. But I can show you. So when the earthquake happened in Japan, we immediately went to the stores and first computed the inflation rate of Japan. Is that okay? And you would expect that after that massive crisis, prices will tend to go up, okay? And a measure of the degree of solidarity in an economy is that stores do not increase the prices at the time when they will feel that that increase in the prices could be interpreted as abusive. Is that okay? So imagine we have an earthquake. Hundreds of people are dying, and then I'm going to double the price of water. Do I look like someone? Yeah, you look like me. You will look like me. But if you had any heart at all, you will not do that. Is that okay? But then we also compute the product availability. And by the way, by looking at the product availability of Japan, that was fantastic. I mean, there's some patterns in the consumption of Japanese that are very, very interesting. I didn't know this before. I mean, we are in the process of understanding this research, you know, so we don't fully understand it yet. But when we went to the stores and count items, we counted items for each category. And we found that there was a category in an extraordinarily big supermarket in Japan. Oh, no, we didn't look at green tea. We looked at shrimp. And there were a lot of items in shrimp. To tell me an obnoxiously large number of items you will think you will ever consume that have shrimp. Any number, any crazy number. Which number would you think? I remember you in class. You never said anything in class, so I'm abusing you now. How many items would you ever think?
Now I can say it, you intimidated me.
Yeah. How many items would you ever think you
100,
could?
I don't
100 items. Who gave me more items? Tell me. How many items do you think? No, you. 2,000. That 2,000. They have 35,000. 35,000 products. In fact, I started reading because I thought it was very interesting. So they have the shrimp, from Thailand that was frozen or not frozen. It was caught, frozen once from Sastoy. I mean, like, there was so much variety. So let me just show you what we did, okay? Now, we count everything on the product availability. Is that okay? I don't discriminate on food. And the reason is that discriminating on categories is extraordinarily difficult in our data. Is that okay? We still don't have the computing power to do it. We have the information, but still we don't have the computing power. In fact, we were using the supercomputer from Harvard for a while, and the guys from astrophysics were very upset with us because there was a span of a month where we used 60% of the computing power of whole Harvard. Okay? And the email was not working, but screw them, I don't care. So I didn't want to do that to MIT, so there's no way I was using our supercomputer. So we don't have, I mean, we don't have yet the computing power. We will. I mean, this partnership with State Street will allow us to actually do that. Is that okay? So, but let me just show you what we did. This is the inflation rate of Japan. And what I want to show you is that number is tiny. This is March 12th, this is the day after, we normalized our prices to 100, and you can see, in this massive crisis, prices increased by 1% at most. So, I mean, of course this fluctuates, but, I mean, and I know it looks big, but look at the scale, it's nothing. Okay, this is the flat line, is that okay? So, Japanese stores did not increase their prices. And now look at product availability. Again, this is every product. From duct tape, well, I don't know if they have duct tape. I don't know if they are developed enough to actually sell duct tape, okay? But, I mean, from tape to shirts to food to furniture, everything. Is that okay? So we counted everything, all the items. And what we did was to normalize it to 100 in January, okay? And this is the decline. So you see they had, this is March 10, just before the crisis. You see a massive decline. This is about 80% of products. This blip here was that all in a lot of the stores, the electricity failed. So forget about this blip. This blip was specifically some of the stores just disappearing from the internet for a day. So I really don't know what exactly happened on April 1st, but they disappeared. But the point is, you can see a massive decline. This is 20% of the products sold disappeared from the stores. And by the way, you can see that actually is improving, no? I mean, you can see that the stores are actually tending to go up. Is that okay? So there's a recovery. But first, there's huge volatility on the product availability. And again, what happened is that the supply side has been so disruptive that it is difficult to supply all the items. So they are in the process of recovering, so it takes a while. So this is an idea of, and by the way, this is for free. So if you go to the Billion Prices Project, bpp.mit.edu, you have this. And another thing that we are doing is for the United Nations. We are constructing something about, wait a second, where is the world inflation? Oops. Yeah, we were doing that for wait a second. I totally screwed up. Okay, it's obviously not my fault. There will be attack at some point in time. But see, this is a problem of abolishing slavery. I tell one of these slaves, do something, and it's a weekend. Why are you kidding me? You're a slave. I mean, if they were a slave, they would have been working. Yes, it's so sad. I mean, yeah, so there was supposed to be attack here. We are preparing something from the United Nations, which is to compute an early warning system for supply disruption of food. Is that okay? And we already have one for the world right now. We already have devised that, and we're going to be talking to the General Assembly in September. Oh, if they allow me in, probably my co-author will go. But as a Venezuelan, we're not very liked in the United Nations lately. And I will make one of those speeches, very insulting speeches. Anyway, but we already have an early warning system for the world, and it will be nice to actually construct one for each country. And we are in that process. That will be public information. That will be available to everybody on this webpage. And because we had the world, I thought we had it put. Yes, questions?
A very tiny question. Can you put up the chart again, the one of the product availability?
Yes.
It seemed like there was a weekly cycle.
Yes.
So what is the reason? It's like they don't sell products on, even before the earthquake.
Yes. No.
They don't sell product on Sunday or something. It's strange.
Yes. A lot of This is very typical. This is typical in every country, by the way. The availability of products has the cycle of the deliveries. But again, I mean, the numbers, I mean, look at the numbers. This is 9921 to, I don't know, 98. This is less than 1%, 0.5% of the products affect their availability. Some stores have practices of, replenishing their stocks on a Tuesday, and so that's what happens. And this is dominated by the biggest store that we have in Japan. So that's, but you see, the cycle has been exacerbated by the supply disruption. Yes?
What was the demand? Because to relate this to inflation, we would need to have the demand, because this is supply.
So yes, so in some sense, I expect in an earthquake, so I mean, this is our expectation. In an earthquake, we expect that the shock to the availability of products is bigger than to the demand, and therefore, by creating this difference between the demand, the typical demand, and the short-term low supply, I would have expected prices to go up. I mean, the price of water, I would have expected to increase much higher. Yes. Yes.
John Starr, class of 86. John Starr, class of 86. So you showed us a chart with basically the U.S. inflation rate at a really high slope going up. And I don't know, if you have any suggestions on, as CEOs, business people, how to manage through this, both professionally and personally.
So you can hire me as a consultant. Personal consultant. No, I'm joking. I don't do consulting. So zero. No, this is very difficult. The way you have some financial instruments that will hedge against inflation, which is called the Treasury Index Inflation Protected Securities, TIPS. But I actually think that their ability to hedge inflation is very limited. Truly, what I would do is to find companies, stocks of companies that their products are very indexed to inflation. I mean, for example, the Tiffany's of the world, their revenues are kind of protected to inflation, because if they increase the prices of their jewelry by 10%, the demand probably doesn't fall by a lot. So in that sense, that I'm not advocating to invest in Tiffany. I'm just giving an example, just a fast reaction to your question. But for example, the profits of retailers will be heavily affected by inflation, but the profits of the financial system will not. So if we were in a healthy financial system, the profits of the financial system actually go up with inflation. So they make a lot of money out of inflation rate. So in that sense, but this will not necessarily be a good moment for that to be a high correlation. But you will have more hedging on some stocks than on the tips, actually. This is a research done by a guy in Chicago, Brent Neiman, that actually shows that there's more hedging on stocks if you construct a proper basket than on the bonds that we have indexed. And this is true also for England. England has real bonds, what is called real bonds, that are indexed to inflation. And those bonds are very good, but they are only for 3 months. It's very short term. So truly you are not protected by the inflation rate that we think is going to happen. On the other hand, yes, that will be my advice. Diversify across countries. I think international diversification will do a great deal of benefit of the possibility of inflation in the US and the depreciation that will come from the US. So sending your money to a country that is relatively booming will protect you from that, and buy stocks there. Do not buy real estate in those countries, especially the country's name starts with the word Peru. Or Hungary, for that matter. Any other questions? Yes, last question, so we can leave. No, I have to finish at 10:30. I have to finish at 10:30, no? Yeah, so this will be the last. Yes.
So there is Google announced they have this price index that they're putting together last year in October. Can you share some relationships between your work and theirs, and some comparison between that?
I don't want to say publicly that their work sucks. No, I'm joking. No, we are very different. We are very different on what type of items we collect, okay? and the methodologies of how we construct the baskets. So we're very different. I don't know exactly what they are going to do with their Google Price Index, but they collect prices from their own store, which are items that are self-reported by the companies. So these are companies reporting some of the items to their store to be sold and advertised in Google. Our technology and the way we collect is very different in the aspect that we go to the stores and collect the prices from the stores for all the items, not the ones that they voluntarily report. So if you think about which items will you report, which items will you promote, you will not necessarily promote the prices that are increasing the fastest. Is that okay? So when you actually look at the outcome, the items look very, very different. And the inflation rates look very different from what Google computed and what we compute. I don't know exactly what is going to happen with Google. I actually think that Google has a lot to lose by releasing an inflation rate that might be wrong. You see, Google has far too much reputation to release a public number of inflation rate and then suddenly be attacked by the way they're being constructed or criticized by that. So I always thought that was very risky for Google to actually release that from the possible negative effect in an environment in which inflation is so, watched and followed. On the other hand, I have no reputation whatsoever to protect. So it was very easy for me to take the decision, make the decision, release whatever crap. Who cares if I'm wrong? I'm always wrong, so who cares? It's very easy. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much for coming on a Saturday morning.